Welcome back to the AcroBee build. In the first episode, we took a close look at all the hardware. In part number 2, we actually assembled all that hardware and made the AcroBee. Look at this little bugger. Ain't she cool? Nice. And in this part, I'm going to get the quad bound to my Tyrannus, and we're going to update the firmware in BetaFlight. Well, let's get to it, right? I'm going to get my radio fired up. Okay, now that it's done with all that song and dance, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the menu. And I'm going to copy an existing model because I already have all my switches and everything set up to my preference. So on the Tyrannus X9D, I'm going to push and hold the model I want to copy. I'm just going to say copy and enter. I'm going to drop it down the next line, and that's pretty much it. I'm going to push and hold enter on that. I have my model copied. I'm going to push and hold enter on it. I'm going to say select model.
Flight mode, acro, rate profile, 1, fail safe disabled.
And now it's loaded the model for me. I'm going to go ahead and page over, and under model name, I'm going to rename this. So maybe I'll call it AcroBee. That's appropriate, right? So give me a second. I'm going to take care of this. Okay, model is named. Now I can scroll around and make sure that my receiver modes are set up correctly. On here, you want to make sure that you're on the D8 and channels 1 through 8. I believe I'm ready to put the radio in bind, and I'm just going to get this out of the way for a second while I get the quad in and also put that into bind mode. So let's hit the enter, and it should start squawking. There it is, the squawky Tyrannus. Let's get this thing into bind mode. So if we flip over the AcroBee, I'm going to zoom in on this. Hopefully you guys can see okay. There's a button here, and this is our bind bootloader button. In order to put this into bind mode, you're going to plug in your battery. Once the battery's connected, push the bind button, and I think that's it. I've never done one of these before, so I don't know exactly what to expect. Let's exit and see if we have a solid light when we put the battery back in now. And I do have a solid red light, so I'm going to assume that we are bound. Excellent. Before you flash your board, NewBee Drone has a lot of great resources on their website to help you be successful with this setup. If you go ahead and jump over to the page for the BeeBrain V2 flight controller and scroll down, you'll see they have all kinds of resources listed. They have other quick build videos. They have a rather complete manual. And they also have hex files for flashing the board to the latest version of BetaFlight. NewBee Drone actually recommends using these particular hex files, so I think I'm going to go ahead and do that to get this board updated. I guess we'll just slap it in there and we'll see what we end up with. Apparently you get more features. I don't know exactly what that entails, but we're going to go ahead and download the hex file for FR Skye, get it installed via BetaFlight, and kind of see what happens. As you scroll through the page, they do go through the feature set. This particular board does have the MPU 6500 gyro, 4 30 amp MOSFETs. It actually has a transponder driver, a battery monitor, of course the JST PH 2.0 power lead, that's our favorite. We have OSD, but whatever, these are all the general features here. Of course there's some other specifications, what you get in the package, some nice videos and all kinds of cool stuff on this page. But what I'm really worried about is the download, so I'm going to go ahead and download that. While that's downloading, it's probably not a bad idea to shoot over and take a look at the manual. This manual does seem to be rather complete. I have no complaints. As we scroll through, it's going to go ahead and tell you everything that is important on the board and the layout on both sides, so both the top and the bottom side of the board. And we'll just keep scrolling. We'll get to some of the good stuff. So now we're actually into the good bits. How to bind it, how to flash BetaFlight, how to download BetaFlight configurator. So they put a lot of effort into this, making sure you're going to be successful. If you have any questions, read through this guide. I'm pretty confident it's going to answer most of those questions for you. They do have a couple older versions of the firmware available if you're interested in that, but I definitely want to go with the latest version of BetaFlight firmware. That's certainly the way to go. They have some common questions. Here we are on the binding page. We just went through this procedure once we set the model up on the radio. But now I want to go ahead and flash it next. So again, we have all the details pretty much in here, everything you're going to need. So hopefully you will be success. Has success. Alright, well I'm going to jump over to BetaFlight, get BetaFlight up, and I'm going to plug the quad into my computer. I'm going to get it plugged right in. And since I've had a whole bunch of flight controllers plugged in on this computer, most of them come up fine, no problem. I don't need to install drivers anymore. If you do need to install drivers, there are details here right on the front home welcome screen in BetaFlight. Check that out. You might need the CP210X driver or one of the USB VCP drivers. That's all here as well. We're not going to use ZDAG because I have an easier solution for that, and we'll get to that in a second. So let's connect up. I'm going to go to the command line and just verify my version. Just by simply typing in version and enter. So we're going to see that this board is currently on 3.2.1. There is a little room for improvement here, so I am going to update. Before I flash firmware, I'm going to take a dump of the board. Just simply type dump in your command line and hit enter. And you're going to have all sorts of things come up on here. I'm going to copy them, so highlight all of it. We'll get up there in a second. Alright, now that we're up here, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to open Notepad, and I'm just going to paste all this info into Notepad. Here's my complete dump. So this is going to have all the original configuration on this board, every last little bit of it. Let's put this window aside, and I'm going to show you one other thing with this. Instead of typing dump, I'm going to type diff and hit enter. And this is going to show you what was changed out of the box. This is interesting. It looks like we might actually have the potential to be able to change the VTX channels through the OSD. That's kind of cool. It also looks like it's got a custom mix as well. Let's copy this. And I'm going to throw it in a notepad again. So here we go. I also have this in a notepad as well. So I'm going to keep these both handy and open while I'm working, just in case if I need to fall back on anything. The last step before we can flash the firmware is going to be preparing the flight controller for bootloader mode. And since this is BetaFlight 3.2, we're going to put the board into bootloader mode by just simply typing BL in the command line and pushing enter. But here's the thing. The computer doesn't see the board in bootloader mode. We need to fix this to make it easier to flash the firmware in the future. I'm going to use the Impulse RC driver fixer to install the DFU driver. For some reason, you have to do this the first time you connect a board. Once this is done, after the initial time, it's no longer an issue, but you do have to do it every time you connect a new board. Because BetaFlight was open, we're going to get this warning, and we're just going to simply have to close it and reopen it. Now that I've reopened BetaFlight, you can see it recognizes the board in DFU mode, and now we can just simply use the BetaFlight firmware flashing utility without any issues. Now that we're here, I'm going to load the firmware local. I'm not going to load it online because we previously downloaded this from NewBee Drone. So I'm going to click on local. And this is going to be wherever you decided to save it. By default, it's probably going to be in your downloads folder. But I went ahead and I made myself a NewBee drone BeeBrain folder so I can keep everything here and find it easily. I'm going to click the file, and it recognizes it. I'm going to say flash firmware. And hopefully it's going to flash successfully. Alright, looks like we ran into an issue. We might have to manually put the board into bootloader mode in order to get it to flash. This can happen sometimes, so let's give that a go. I'm going to refer back to the manual, and let's try to figure this out. Okay, so I've put the board in DFU mode manually by pushing and holding in the button and then plugging the flight controller into the USB port on my computer. I've also selected no reboot sequences. That's what NewBee Drone recommends. So let's go ahead and try this again. And it looks much better already. Okay, cool. So we've got the firmware updated. Don't take it personal if you have an issue flashing your firmware once or twice or even 9 times. BetaFlight can be kind of moody, and just try it again. Try flipping some of the switches here. Again, sometimes this no reboot sequence will help, but BetaFlight can be fickle, and just try again. Sometimes it'll go on the second or third try. Now that the firmware is flashed, I'm going to power cycle the board by unplugging it. It's plugged back in, and I should see my COM port come back up, and now I can hit on connect. I'm going to go through and start taking a look at my configuration in here. Hopefully everything is going to be set up by default. Ports, configuration, 3200, motor stop, 8K, 8K, it even has the name, S-bus, telemetry. Doesn't really look like I need to make any initial changes here. Power and battery, we probably don't have to change anything here out of the gate. I'm going to bump up my maximum cell voltage a little bit because I'm using HV batteries. I will leave all this for now. PID tuning. So it looks like they've got some pretty substantial numbers in here. I am going to go ahead and set these to my personal preference. Some of these numbers are a little high here, so I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to give it a little bit of expo as well. Okay, that looks good on my rates. I always like to do a little anti-gravity. We'll do that. I think we're good to save here. We got our filters. They do have it on bi-quad. I'm going to mess with this down the road. I'm probably going to end up turning down the D-gains a little bit. A lot. Probably at least 40-ish a piece on here. And then I'll come back and I'll do bi-quad. But I've never flown these motors before, so I'm going to experiment with this a little bit off camera. And you know what? I will go over this in the final video of this series as I wrap things up. So let's start with that for now. Let's go to our receiver tab and we'll plug a battery in and see if everything's working. Look at this, it actually has the RSSI channel defined. That is awesome. We also have our Taranis map correctly input. I'm going to fire up my radio and plug in a battery, and let's see if this responds correctly. So as I go and move my sticks, I can see everything is moving appropriately. That all looks pretty good. Now I can set up modes. This is personal preference. I kind of just know how I like to do it. Click add range. And this is on my aux 1, angle, horizon, anti-gravity, aux 2, aux 2, aux 2. Angle mode goes there, horizon mode goes there, drag that out. I like to still have enabled stabilizing modes in the whoops, just cause sometimes you need this, even though I prefer to fly acro, that can be helpful. I'm going to turn on air mode. And I do have a fail-safe range. Let's save this, see if they're going to work.
What is disarmed?
So on my arm,
What is armed?
I'm in the armed range. On aux 2,
mode, angle.
I'm in angle,
Flight mode,
horizon,
flight mode,
and now acro. And fail-safe.
Fail-safe active.
It's the wrong switch. Number 4, save it. Okay, so now that enables the fail-safe. This all looks pretty good. Just in case I forgot to save. Now I think I'm ready to set up my OSD, but I'm going to input my settings from this from a dump from one of my other whoops, just because it'll be a lot easier to put everything where I like it. So I'm going to get that dump, and I will be right back. Okay, I've got my setup for the OSD, and I'm just going to paste it and hit enter. Now save. Enter again. The flight controller is going to reboot. I'm going to connect back up. Let's jump to the OSD tab, and this should be how I like it. Hey, look at that. Looks pretty good. Just missing my crosshairs. That's in my way. I'm gonna change this alarm. Let's see, double check my end screen. It does have RSSI, so I'm gonna work on getting some of this enabled. I'm gonna figure it out, and we'll get back to that. But let's save this. I'm going to upload my preferred large font. Upload. Let's wait on this. Da -da -da -da. Sometimes if you rub this, it goes faster. So rub it, rub it, rub it, rub it. Okay, board reboots. We can reconnect. And I think that's about it on this to get started. Alright, I think that's it here. I'm going to jump over to the motor tab and break in these unicorns. Okay, so the way I like to break in my motors is, well, first you need to connect your battery. And there are props installed on here. This is a tiny whoop. It's not the most dangerous thing in the world, but we're going to be spinning these props up a little bit, so don't stick your fingers in there. Use a little common sense when you're doing this, and just think about being safe. So with that said, I'm going to plug in my battery. I'm going to enable the motors. I'm going to click on the master, and I'm going to use my arrow key to slowly start ramping up the motors. I'm going to get them up to about 1060. And I'm just going to let this run here for about 4 or 5 minutes. And then I'm going to let the motors completely cool down for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'm going to repeat this process. I usually do this about 3 or 4 times, depending on the motors. So idle them 4 or 5 minutes, let them cool. Idle them 4 or 5 minutes, let them cool. Again, 3 or 4 times, your preference. But the motors do feel like they have a little bit more power out of the box, and I feel it's just a good thing to easily wear them in a little bit before you do some serious rippage. Well, I'm going to let this run, and I'm going to check back in a few minutes. Alright, now the motors are done breaking in. I'm just going to disconnect the battery and unplug the USB. And that's it. This guy should be ready to fly now. I think there's a couple other things that I'm going to have to button up, like PID tuning and figure out where I like that. Also, I think I'm going to have to figure out how to use the VTX in this. Initially, it does kind of look like I can do it with the transmitter, so I think that's pretty cool. Well, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to live with it for a couple of weeks, and I'm going to get back to you guys, and I'm going to tell you what I think. That's going to do it for this episode. Please check me out on Instagram, @DerekandHisDrone. Click on all my things, leave a comment, subscribe. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.